is make things up. We are focused on making life more affordable for Canadians, on fighting climate change, and on getting guns off our streets. Les approches et les attaques
the approach
les attaques d'Andrew Scheer
and Andrew Scheer's attacks
false.
are completely false.
Ils ne peuvent rien faire que d'inventer
All they can do
des choses
is make
parce
things
qu'ils
up
n'ont rien à offrir
because they
aux
have
Canadiens,
nothing to offer
sauf des
Canadians
coupures.
except cuts.
Notre plan va rendre
Our
la vie plus
plan will
abordable
make
pour les
life more
familles,
affordable
va
for
lutter contre les
families,
changements
will fight
climatiques,
climate
et
change,
va enlever les armes à
and
feu
will
de nos rues.
take guns off our
Andrew
streets.
Scheer has said repeatedly he has no intention of reopening the abortion debate, and yet your party keeps raising questions about his commitment to a woman's right to choose. How is that any different than what Andrew Scheer is doing to you?
Mr. Scheer has not said that he would stand up for access to reproductive services in New Brunswick, where a Conservative premier is watching the only private clinic to provide reproductive services to women close down because they don't get provincial funding. We need a federal government that will unequivocally stand up and defend women's rights, not passively accept what the law is even though they don't personally agree with it. We need a government that will fight for women's rights, and that's exactly what we will do in New Brunswick and anywhere else. Access to reproductive rights and services are limited by Conservative governments.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Joyce Napier, CTV. Many things happened during a campaign, but two in particular, the rise of the Bloc Québécois in Quebec and the rise in the polls of Jagmeet Singh in the rest of the country. Were you expecting that?
We know that you can't take any votes for granted in an election, and Canadians have an important choice to make about the kind of future they want for their kids, about the kind of government they want to have come Tuesday morning. And that's why we've made very clear what our focus is, what our focus has been for the past 4 years. Investing in families, making sure that families have more help with the high costs of raising their kids, with things like the Canada Child Benefit that helps those families that need it and doesn't help the families of millionaires. We're focused on fighting climate change with the most ambitious plan that Canada has ever had to fight climate change. We're focused on strengthening gun control and getting guns like assault weapons and handguns off our streets. The Conservatives are focused on proposing cuts, on weakening gun control, and on stopping the fight against climate change. The choice is clear. Do we move forward on making life more affordable for families, on fighting climate change, on getting guns off our streets, or do we go with Conservative cuts?
Why do you think this rise of these two parties happened during this campaign?
I think in a campaign, Canadians look at all sorts of different paths forward, look at different ways of making the choice about where their government is headed. And we see that it boils down, with days to go before the election, between a choice between Conservative cuts and a Liberal government that will continue to make life more affordable for Canadians, fight climate change, and get guns off our streets.
M. Trudeau, le premier ministre du Nouveau-Brunswick,
The Premier of New Brunswick has said that Quebec is kind of the spoiled child of the Federation. What do you think about that comment? I think Mr. Higgs should defend women's rights and ensure there is access to abortion and services for all women in New Brunswick. And we will be working to ensure that even under a Conservative government, women's rights are defended. But we saw Conservative politicians right across the country saying that there's no need to tackle climate change, but they're wrong. And the fact is that we need progressives to fight climate change. And that's the reason why it's not enough to have an opposition, a progressive opposition, as is offered by the Bloc Québécois. We need Quebecers in government in order to stand up to these conservative politicians who don't want to do anything when it comes to fighting climate change. And we will continue to fight those politicians that don't want to protect the environment and the future of our children. The Premier has said he would never work with you. The Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, said he would convene a First Ministers' Conference in January. Your relationship with a number of premiers is not very good, so how do you expect to work with those people, and do you have a plan to do that? We were able to show in the last 4 years that with an approach, a collaborative approach, we were able to work on investments in infrastructure, the fight against climate change through a pan-Canadian plan. We were able to sign health care agreements. We were able to make investments, including in New Brunswick, and we will continue to put the people of New Brunswick and Canadians at the very heart of all the investments we make. As we've shown, conservative politicians like Doug Ford do not want to invest in their communities and in the necessary infrastructure. So in that case, we will work directly with the municipalities to ensure that we are helping citizens and creating stronger communities. We will always work for the good of our citizens and with all premiers across the country.
We recognize that there have been a lot of positive progress made over the past 4 years with the premiers across the country, whether it was strengthening the Canada Pension Plan, whether it was renegotiating health accords, whether it was historic investments in housing, in infrastructure, in transit right across the country, or whether it was establishing a pan-Canadian plan to fight climate change. We recognize that there are elements on which conservative premiers don't want to act, whether it's the fight against climate change or investing in communities. But we're going to continue to focus on Canadians, on the investments they need, and on the fight against climate change.
TVA. Now, if you were re-elected, do you think you would need a Quebec lieutenant? I'm very proud to be the MP for Papineau, to be a proud Quebecer and a proud Canadian. And what we were able to accomplish in the last 4 years happened because Quebecers chose to join a progressive government. They stopped choosing to be in the opposition, and they chose to reflect our Quebec values right across the country and right across the globe. The defense of women's rights, the defense of communities, LGBTQ communities, to fight climate change and to invest in families rather than austerity. These are things that Quebecers agree with. We decided to deliver a government that would do all of that. And now we need to continue that in order to prevent the cuts and austerity offered by the Conservatives. In 2016, you said, I don't need a lieutenant in Quebec because there's a general, you. Now, is it the fault of General Trudeau if the Bloc has risen so much? Well, Quebecers always have a right to choose their representatives in Ottawa. And in this election, Quebecers are facing a very, very clear choice. Do we choose a progressive opposition or a progressive government? For 10 years, we saw cuts under Harper, cuts to culture, cuts to the fight against climate change, tax cuts for the wealthiest and nothing for families. Quebecers turned their back on Stephen Harper because we all knew that we needed a government that would reflect our values, progressive Canadian values. And what are those progressive values? And what is a progressive government? Well, it's a government that chooses to help families. You have a new baby, and families need money with a new baby. A government that invests in seniors, that increases the supplement, and that gives more money to seniors over the age of 75. It's a government that takes concrete action to fight climate change. Unlike the Conservatives, who promise that they will tear up the only real plan Canada has ever had to fight climate change. And Quebecers, like all Canadians, have an important choice to make on Monday. Do we continue to go forward under a government that will represent and reflect our values and our desire to build a better society, or do we go back to a Conservative government that will cut?
CBC, Mr. Trudeau, you repeated a few times in French over the last few days that Canadians could wake up on Tuesday morning with a Conservative government with Andrew Scheer as Prime Minister. You're now running English radio ads with that sentence. I'd like to know, if that does happen, is it your fault?
I think Canadians have a choice to make. And Canadians, I am confident, will make the right choice. A choice between conservative cuts or continuing to move forward on making life more affordable, on fighting climate change, on getting guns off the streets. I'm not taking any vote for granted, and I know Canadians are reflecting on the kind of future they want for their kids, for their grandkids. I'm confident that we're going to make the right choice and move forward.
Why are you using that sentence more in French and in radio ads and not at the podium like right now?
I'm happy to repeat what Mr. Scheer is saying, in that there is a chance that there could be a Conservative government, and that would mean cuts. That would mean $53 billion in cuts, 4 times bigger cuts than even Doug Ford is doing in Ontario. I know Ontarians don't want that. I know Canadians across the country don't want that. The choice we are facing on Monday is, do we continue to move forward in making life more affordable, in fighting climate change and getting guns off our streets, or do we accept a Conservative government with cuts as its main agenda?
Abigail Beeman, Global News. A Global News investigation this morning showed that in the cases of some people wanted for deportation, if they evade detection for long enough, the CBSA will simply cancel their arrest warrant. Should that practice continue?
Unfortunately, over 10 years of Conservative government, there were massive cuts to the Canada Border Services Agency, which was extremely unfortunate. But it is what happens when a Conservative government chooses cuts to services instead of moving forward on investing in communities, investing in community safety, investing in Canadians. We, of course, take the responsibility of protecting the integrity of our borders and our immigration system extremely seriously, which is why we've made massive investments, and we will continue to support the important work that the CBSA and our immigration officials do every single day.
Should the practice of canceling those arrest warrants continue?
We will continue to make investments in CBSA to make sure that they are doing their job and ensuring the integrity and the full application of our immigration rules and laws. Canada is one of the few countries in the world where people are positive towards immigration because it has created such a strong country, strong not in spite of our differences, but because of them. And the choice we have going forward is, do we see cuts to programs and services under a Conservative government that has done that in the past, wants to do that again? Or do we make life more affordable, get guns off our streets, and fight climate change?
Good morning. Yesterday, my colleague Joanna asked you about Bill 21, and you did not give a clear answer. So I am going to ask you again and assume that if you don't give a clear answer, that you're doing so on purpose. Do you think the law is discriminatory, yes or no?
I have made it very clear that I do not think that a government should be telling people what it is they should or shouldn't wear. But Quebecers themselves are taking this law to court and defending the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as is their right. I have said that my federal government would not intervene at this stage, but I also have not closed the door to intervening at a later stage, because we understand that a federal government always needs to be there, potentially, to defend rights like women's rights, like LGBT rights, like minority rights, like the rights of francophones outside of Quebec.
Bear with my preamble here. Mr. Scheer gave a speech in Quebec earlier this week directed at Francophone Bloc potential voters. And in the room, I went to see the only brown people who were there, and I asked them if they supported Mr. Scheer's position on Bill 21. And the gentleman told me that he agrees with Mr. Scheer's position because he thinks Canada should be a Christian country. Do you think Canada should be a Christian country?
I think Canada is a country that reflects that defending individual rights and freedoms is the core of any strong society. We know that defending women's rights, minority rights, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, defending people's rights is key to creating a strong, pluralistic society. And that's exactly what the Liberal Party will always stand for. We will always defend the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which includes freedom of religion.
Good morning, Adrian Gobriel with City News, City TV, Toronto. It's no coincidence that the Friday before an election, we're standing in Whitby. This is a riding that's wide open, especially after your former MP decided to leave your party and not run in this election. How concerned are you about losing an important GTA riding like Whitby?
First of all, let me thank Selina Caesar-Chavannes again for her extraordinary service to this community and wish her the very best in her future. We're not taking any votes for granted anywhere across the country, which is why I'm excited about getting out across Ontario, as I was across rural Quebec over the past few days, as I will be across different parts of the country in the coming days, to talk to Canadians about the really important choice we're facing on Monday. We're facing either Conservative cuts 4 times greater than Doug Ford's, or a government that will continue to make life more affordable for Canadians. We'll fight climate change. We'll get guns off our streets by strengthening gun control.
You said twice this morning you're not taking any votes for granted, though there's many who believe this election will be won and lost in the GTA. Do you agree?
There are 338 ridings right across this country, and every Canadian's vote and voice counts. I look forward to the opportunity to work right across the country to continue to earn the trust of Canadians with the investments we've made over the past years that have lifted hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty, including 300,000 kids, that have invested in the fight against climate change to record levels, protected more of our oceans, more of our land, banned single-use plastics, put a price on pollution right across the country over the objections of the Conservative premiers who want to do nothing, and to continue to strengthen gun control at a time where Conservatives want to weaken it. This is an important election for every Canadian, and that's why we're sharing this message from coast to coast to coast.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. John Cook, Durham Radio News. Just wondering about Selina Caesar-Chavannes. Do you think that her experience in the Whitby riding has hurt the Liberals' chance of taking this seat?
Yeah, as I said, Selina has been an excellent representative and an excellent MP for Whitby, and I thank her deeply for her service, and I wish her the very best in the coming years. I know that Ryan Turnbull is going to make an outstanding Member of Parliament for Whitby. I look forward to working with him and our great team right across the country to make life more affordable, to get guns off our streets, and to fight climate change, and to push back against Conservative cuts.
And was the experience with Ms. César-Chavins, did that impact your decision to come to the Durham region so late in the campaign?
I am happy to be back in the Durham region and continue to campaign right across the country to make sure that Canadians understand the important choice and the positive choice they get to make on continuing to deliver more help to families, safer communities, and a better, stronger fight against climate change.
Mr. Trudeau, Justin Ling, freelance. Yesterday, the Trump administration signed an agreement with Turkey that basically greenlit their annexation of parts of northern Syria. Do you have concerns about that agreement? Do you have concerns about how it may impact our Kurdish allies? And do you have concerns about how it may, in fact, lead to a conflict in the northern part of Syria?
We are very concerned and strongly condemn Turkey's incursion into Syria. We will continue to work with our international allies to push for stability and de-escalation in the region, to ensure that there is not a rise of Daesh. And we will continue to play an important role in leading the NATO training mission in Iraq at the same time as Canada works alongside all our international partners to fight terrorism and push for stability in the Middle East.
We strongly condemn the Turkish incursion into Syria, and we're working with our international colleagues and allies to foster stability and a de-escalation of this situation. Canada is present in Iraq and has taken a leadership position within NATO, and we will continue to work in the region to prevent any rise in the strength of Daesh.
You've signaled support for the Kurdish people, and you've even offered military aid. That military aid never showed up. It sat in a Montreal warehouse for the past several years, and exports military aid to at least the Iraqi Kurdish people have virtually stopped. So at a certain point, is your allyship more words than action? You've not said you do anything differently. You've not offered any sort of actual tangible support. So, at a certain point, how can our allies trust that you'll do anything more than just express condemnation?
When we got elected in 2015, we decided that Canada would not anymore have any engagements in Syria, that we would focus our help in Iraq. And that is exactly what we've done. We've worked with multiple partners over the past 4 years to offer help, support, and strengthen our local allies in the fight against Daesh. We will continue to work with our allies, with international partners on stabilizing the region and pushing back against Daesh. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you all very much.